It really is all about the crust when it comes to pie baking. If you get the crust wrong, what's the point of the filling? So can we avoid those extra steps and achieve a perfectly baked apple pie? Yes, those added steps of adding in vodka or vinegar to stop gluten formation, or blind baking the crust prior to the pie filling being added in. If we pay attention to all the little details, I think we can. Alright, so there is just a few steps to make this apple pie. We're going to start with the dough. We will be using a food processor for a brief moment to initialize the butter, but you can get away without one if you have something like this, which will dice up the butter for you. I'll show you why in a second. For the dough ingredients, you'll need 2.5 cups all-purpose flour, half tablespoon granulated sugar, half teaspoon sea salt, 7 to 8 tablespoons ice water, and 2 sticks of very cold unsalted butter, which we will cube right away and put right back into the fridge. We want to keep everything cold at all times throughout this whole process. It's very important, keep that in mind. Add in the dry blend of ingredients to the food processor and pulse that a couple times just to break up any clumps. Then we'll add in the butter. Pulse the butter down into the blend. What we need are these pea-sized beads, and this is looking perfect. So now let's blend in just a portion of our ice water. Now the ice is just to keep the water cold, so don't blend the ice into the mix. And don't go too crazy here with the processor, we will finish mixing by hand. Pour out the mix onto a clean surface and notice these pea-sized beads of butter. This is perfect to start kneading by hand. Now you can hand mix on a cutting board with a bench scraper, or you can also use a large mixing bowl. So not everyone has a food processor, so I wanted to show you that a pastry blender and a mixing bowl can achieve those same small chunks of butter. Just don't overuse the pastry blender. Okay, so now let's jump back to the process blend and develop this dough. It will come together pretty crumbly at first. This is normal. Just work the mixture by compressing with your hands and fingers. It should start to mold and hold some shape after a few minutes of kneading. If your mixture is not coming together, just add little amounts of ice cold water. Now you know that flaky crust we are trying to achieve? It all starts right here by keeping this butter as cold as possible. Now the heat of your hands will start to warm and even melt the butter, so work fast. So I mentioned using a mixing bowl at the start of this process to knead and form this dough. So here it is, basic kitchen pro tip number 2. Just freeze your mixing bowl for about 20 minutes prior to this process. It will keep everything nice and cold as you work the dough. So this came together nicely. Let's check in with Evan as he wraps this up.
Get this formed into a round disc. Make sure it's not too cracking. It might be too dry. Got a little bit here. Mold it in. Set ourselves up for success once it comes to rolling this out into a big disc. Still see little pieces of butter. That's what we're looking for before we go in the fridge. Now we'll prepare our pie filling. We're gonna use a mix of Granny Smith, nice firm tart apple, and Honeycrisp. For the filling, we're gonna use butter, a couple tablespoons, half cup brown sugar, quarter cup white sugar, spice mix here of cinnamon, nutmeg, a little bit of ginger, a little bit of salt, some flour to get it all combined together and thicken our sauce, and 1 lemon, the zest to balance out the apples, and we'll use the juice to keep everything from browning while we're making our sauce.
Let's start this next stage by zesting 1 lemon, and we will juice that same lemon. Nothing goes to waste. Granny Smiths are the gold standard when it comes to baking. It's a very firm, super tart apple. It just bakes very well. And then for the sweetness, we'll be adding in some Honeycrisp. So this recipe calls for 4 pounds of apples. That's maybe 8 to 9 apples depending on the size of the apples that you have. This is where you enlist some help and get everyone involved. Plus, they're all gonna be coming in to eat those cut apples, so might as well put them to work. And if you are making a pie, it's probably for some occasion. So this is a great way to incorporate your guests into the kitchen. So roll up those sleeves, get your hands dirty, crack some jokes, and most importantly, skin extra apples because I will be eating all of them. Coat them with that lemon juice and toss them around. Then we'll be moving to the stovetop. So there you go. 4 pounds of apples, skinned, cored, and cut. Ready to cook down on the stovetop and caramelize. Let's get that pan on medium heat. Start with 2 tablespoons of butter, and you're going to need a larger pan, something with taller walls to hold in all of the apples. Before we add anything else to the pan, stir the apples as we want to bring them and the pan back up to temperature. As this happens, the excess moisture will be released from the apples. Once we notice the liquid buildup at the bottom of the pan, we can then add in the rest of the ingredient. Half cup brown sugar, quarter cup granulated sugar, 1 teaspoon ground cinnamon, 1 teaspoon ground nutmeg, 1/8 teaspoon ground allspice, and quarter teaspoon salt. As this dry blend incorporates itself to the apples, the caramel sauce will start to form. This process will take about 10 to 15 minutes. Now the flour is to thicken up everything. So if you find your sauce to be too thin and runny, just add a touch more of that flour. Not too much, just little amounts. So once everything is looking good and incorporated, add in the zest and then stir for a bit and take off heat. Transfer to a mixing bowl and let this cool at room temp for a little while. Be sure to scrape that pan clean. We don't want all that hard work going to waste. And once this filling is dropped in temperature, we can then finish cooling in the fridge. So at this point, we have cooked down the apples, released all that excess moisture that we don't want, and developed the caramel sauce. So things are starting to come together. We do have that dough in the fridge that we need to roll out. So prep that work surface, grab that rolling pin, and let's roll some dough. Evan, what are we looking for?
Looking for a 12-inch round, roughly, 1/4 inch thick, so we can cover this pie crust with a little extra, so that we can trim it to length. So to get started, even pressure, especially if you got a larger mound of dough, you want to make real gentle, gradual moves and just kind of keep moving your rolling pin around. So we got some cracks here. You can fix those so they don't kind of propagate and keep getting worse.
As you roll out the dough, continue to rotate 90 degrees. And every 4th rotation, flip the dough and apply that same method on the opposite side. This will ensure an evenly rolled out disc.
Again, we're looking for 1/4 inch thick. We're a good little thickness here left to go. If you need to flip it over once it starts getting bigger, you can roll it up onto the pin. Keep the pin itself floured, helps a lot. Quick check, just about there. Make sure it's all even. A little thicker over here. All right, so again, flour this roller, flour the top of the crust, and roll this up here. It's one of my favorite kitchen tricks I've ever learned. I'm gonna just drape this over gently like that. So a little adjustment, just gently lift it, press it into the pie pan. Just kind of tap the corners and edges, make sure it's sitting flat, about ready to rock. So normally we could just go ahead and dump our pie filling in and then let it chill, but this is already pretty warm. We're gonna have to put it back in the fridge just to make sure it doesn't melt. Then we'll get it loaded up with our pie filling. All right, so our pie's ready to be assembled. Got our apple mix chilled, pie crust chilled. Let's get it together. You see here, this is really thickened up. Get it kind of mixed. We'll just go ahead and dump it in. Get all that cinnamony goodness, kind of spread it around. One last step before we get ready to roll out the lattice is we're gonna add a little bit of butter on top. So just to get this well incorporated, we're gonna do a couple thin slices here. Sprinkle this around. A little extra butter never hurt anyone. Back in the fridge. Kind of the name of the game of pie making. Back in the fridge. Now the top half of the dough, we're gonna roll out in similar fashion. We're gonna cut 12 roughly even pieces and we're gonna weave them together into what's called a lattice. Looks cool, allows some gaps for the pie to breathe, so it doesn't get a soggy top as well. That steam releases, top the pie, and we'll be ready to bake. All right, give it one last check around, make sure it's looking pretty even, about a 1/4 inch. So it's a good idea whenever you're doing something like this, just to kind of pre-measure out, do a halfway cut.
So we need 12 strips in total to lattice this pie. And since Evan is in deep concentration, I'll dive in here and explain how to do this. So first, lay 6 strips vertically and evenly spaced. Secondly, fold every other, 3 in total, all the way back, so they're nearly falling off the pie. So let's keep an eye on Evan. As he grabs that first horizontal strip, he has a realization that he didn't fold back those first strips all the way back. Yep, there you go. Just fold those back all the way to the edge so they're nearly falling off. This will allow you to run that first horizontal strip all the way at the edge. Now you can overlay the first 3 vertical strips back across the pie. So I want to note here, the vertical strips will always alternate in 3s, and the horizontal strips will always be placed in singles, one at a time. Now you see Evan taking the opposite 3 vertical strips and peeling back until they hook that horizontal strip. This will allow him to place that second horizontal strip and peel back, overlaying that set of 3 vertical strips back across the top of the pie. And that's the process. Just repeat until you have laid all 6 horizontal strips across the pie. Now, the next move is to trim off the excess dough from the lattice strips. But do not discard these little pieces. I'll show you why in a minute. Once we have the strips trimmed to length, we can now roll the edge of the pie. Keep some thickness here. This will allow you to get creative when it comes to decorating the pie before we bake it. If you need to add back in some thickness to balance out the edge, go ahead and reach for those little pieces we trimmed off the lattice strips. Slowly continue to work your way around the pie, finding a nice, thick, balanced edge to complement the size of the lattice strips. Now, there's many different ways to decorate a pie. You can get super technical and overlay a braided edge, but we are in the basic kitchen, so let's keep it simple and go for that rustic look.
All right, so that's nearly ready to go. And once again, back into the fridge for a few minutes. I'm gonna whip up an egg wash and give it a nice, beautiful golden brown. And then we are going to clean it up a little bit, get it in the oven. Crack an egg. Before we throw our pie in, we're gonna give it a quick egg wash. Sprinkle it with some coarse sugar. To make our egg wash, about a tablespoon or a little less water, just to make it a little more spreadable. And it helps bring out a little more golden color in your pie crust. So,
before we apply this egg wash, let's dress up this pie a bit by fluting the edge. So Evan, why don't you show us the basics on how to pinch the edge of the pie?
Yeah, so you just take 2 fingers, index, middle finger, and another hand and push that in. There's other techniques, pretty much the same thing. You're creating a pocket, these fingers that you can push that dough into. Super simple. You know, if you're lazy, you can just take a fork, give it a little texture going around. I'm gonna go with that traditional look. Doesn't need to look perfect right off the bat, just sort of get the shape going, come back in, clean it up. And again, it's gonna bake. It's gonna be covered in sugar and egg. Gonna get crispy and golden. Doesn't matter a whole lot. All right, so the egg wash. Don't want too much egg. This is not the ideal silicone brush, so just make sure not a whole lot on there. We'll start by just getting our perimeter brush, inside and out. Make sure you don't flick egg all over the kitchen. And we'll go up and down the lattices, spreading out that excess from the edges. Add a little more as needed. Don't need a whole lot. The main purpose of this, other than making the crust golden, is to hold a little bit of sugar. It also makes it look good, sweetens up the crust a bit at the top. Now the finishing touch. Nice sprinkle, sugar, something a little more coarse. Some of that raw sugar works great for this, or turbino sugar. Get it on a little bit of everything. Spots in the middle. You don't want a ton, but you want it evenly coated. All right, ready to go in our oven. Pie's ready to go. Oven preheated to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. So let's pop it in. We got our pizza stone in here, middle rack. Gonna go in for 25 minutes. This will help ensure the bottom gets nice and crispy and doesn't get too soggy. So we're a little over 30 minutes in and starting to see some browning on our crust. Looks pretty good, but we still probably have at least another 20 plus minutes to go. You know, there's no bubbling inside of the pie. We want to see it fully cooked. So what we're gonna do is wrap that tin foil, help keep that protected, let the rest of this cook. So we've run this for about 33 minutes, I believe, at 400 degrees. That higher temperature initially gets the crust to set, especially that bottom. And we're gonna drop it down to 375. We're gonna go in for another 20, 25 minutes. The main thing we're looking for before we pull it out is the top being fully baked and our filling bubbling to make sure it's fully cooked. And the benefit here of our, our glass pan is we can pop it out, check the bottom, which is always a benefit. You can't do that with aluminum or ceramics, so nice benefit of that one. So come over here, gotta drop the 375, open it up, back onto our pizza stone. And yeah, we'll set our timer. All right, looks like we're ready to go. Pull this out, starting to bubble, everything's golden. You take a look, like just eyeball, no. Yeah, another 2 minutes, bottom's a little undercooked. Everything else looks pretty close to done, but pies are a little more forgiving than a cake or cookie, so a couple minutes will be good. All right, take two. Top's a little more golden, a little more bubbly. This is the worst part of pie baking. This has to rest 3 to 4 hours at a minimum. There's nothing worse than a soggy pie that you've cut into too early. It's just gonna fall all over the place. But the good news is, everything looks like it's come together really well, so it'll be worth the wait.
Oh, show us your good side.
Maybe.
Looks like a pie.
It tastes good. Not a beauty contest.
Well, this may not be a beauty contest, and good thing, because visually, this pie was not built with symmetry. The intention of this pie was not to win awards. We set out to achieve that perfect flaky pie crust, baked all the way through without all those extra steps. Simply by paying attention to all the little details along the way, this apple pie turned out. A nice golden glaze, perfectly baked across the top, chunks of butter marbled throughout the dough, giving it those flaky air pockets for a crisp bite, sweet and tart apples with a warm caramel sauce. It's pretty much everything I look for in a rustic, home-baked apple pie. And yes, of course, a scoop of vanilla ice cream? Yeah, why not?